Hello, hello. Bl'Artagnan here, bringing you Mother's Fixation, Kadaj's Lufenia. That sounds wrong. These catabal passes, or whatever they're called, camel things, they're jerks, which isn't surprising. We've had a lot of those lately, but these guys find new and creative ways to irritate us. I ended up having to bring 2 synergy characters to get through the stage, which is something I normally try to avoid doing, just as, I guess, a matter of creative expression, and to try to make things a bit more accessible to folks. But these guys, it's a rough fight, especially for someone like me who tends to rely pretty heavily on debuffs to enable his teams. So having guys that cleanse every 10% is that's pretty rough. As you see here, I'm begrudgingly going to Brave Attack with Golbez because I don't want these guys cleansing right before using their recast to petrify my guys. That's one of the other mechanics, is if they're not debuffed when that recast goes off, you get petrified for either 2 turns or until they're broken. Those are the 2 kind of criteria for petrifying if you can pull that off. That said, with 70 turns, that's time you may not be able to afford. So I usually just kind of reset if that happens to me personally. 70 turns isn't the tightest turn count we've ever seen, but it's on the lower end of things, and is not helped by the fact that these guys keep cleansing the debuffs you would normally rely on to increase your damage. So that's a pain. Luckily, Golbez here, being A, synergy, and B, dark, which they're naturally weak against, can pump out pretty consistent damage throughout the fight. Enabled, of course, by his brother, who brings tremendous auras, which we finally have access to. We finally passed the sea of Holy Absorb, and Pecil is now, like, usable. Not that he wasn't usable before, but I mean, like, he's, you can just straight up use him. He's kind of unchained, which is great. So, the other mechanic these guys have is at the usual threshold, 79, 49, 29%. They gain a bunch of Brave and do the Kieran Bears thing. They become... they take 1 Brave damage per hit. Luckily, Exdeath, who just hopped in here, is able to reduce them to 0 even, throughout that, regardless of that. So I guess technically this is another entry into the Exdeath saga. I'm taking credit for that one, I think. But the fact that they cleanse right before doing that, the big gain shuts down a lot of ways you normally, you can't freeze them. It also makes it difficult to use insta-breakers like Caius or Gabrant. Still possible, but difficult, because they do, the delay they do isn't that long, but it's there. And of course, Faris, who you can see there on call, gets kind of dunked on as well, which is great because they just released her and gave her a shitty rework, and I'm not bitter or anything. I'm pretty bitter, not gonna lie. So, HP attacking with Golbez here to get some damage without pushing them below their thresholds to once again survive the recast. The actual damage is nothing here because Nine is doing his his paladin thing, which is great. But yeah, it's actually my first time using Nine. I'm pretty happy with him. He's okay. His defensive stuff. I mean, his shields are great. Not quite as robust as Warrior of Lights, but still quite potent. His healing's okay, and his defensive things, his White Knight and all that are, they're not as consistent as something as like a Gladio or a Beatrix or a Warrior of Light. But they don't need to be, because he's more of a damage dealer. I mean, people. I'm not going to join the chorus of people who've been debating what Nine's role is. His role is, I think, he deals damage and he has some mitigation, and there you go. That's all you need. But he's quite good here too, because there's pretty consistent HP damage to activate his Rebellious Fang's aura buff from his LD, and when they telegraph the big hit, so you know when to time it. But yeah, I think the thing about this stage that irritates me the most, and why it's been one of the most frustrating stages for a lot of people, I think is just because the constant cleanse, the every 10%, really makes it hard to feel like you're building offensive momentum. For a lot of, outside of a select few characters, most characters, you know, their damage isn't going to peak just because they hit the button. Golbez, I think, in this stage is one of the exceptions where basically any time you hit his button, he's going to be doing about as good damage as he could have done that turn. But for Nine and Pecil, without the Holy Enchant, or Imperil, they're going to be hitting for weaker. And, you know, you run Terra here, for instance, and you're going to see some peaks and valleys in how her damage turns out. She's still totally usable, it just doesn't feel as good because you so frequently will be like, oh, man, this meteor did not feel like a good Terra meteor. A meaty meteor. So I guess that's kind of my my little thesis about this stage is you can overcome it. It's just frustrating that having every 10% be a cleanse is so oppressively, like, if it's not shutting down your character straight out, looking at, you know, like I don't know, there are a bunch of debuff characters, Exdeath, Faris, whatever. If you're not doing that, it's still just kind of hampering you at such frequent intervals that you can never really set up a good, like, okay, here's where we cut loose kind of phase. Most fights, there's some kind of window at some point in the fight when it's like, okay, now is the time to cut loose, and you never really fully get that with these guys. I mean, you get a point where you can cut loose, so to speak, but like, Caius coming in here for the 50%, as you can see. But like, they quickly erase most, you know, a lot of the sources of damage you get, which is, it's a fair way to do it. Like, you know, they're allowed to. It just feels shitty to play against, is all it comes down to. And I think a lot of this game comes down to feel. If it doesn't feel good to play, why are you doing it? I find myself often now talking about like which characters' buttons feel good to press. Like, I like Exdeath because every time you press one of its buttons, it's like boom, 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 something awesome. You know, big floaty guy throws meteors, and it's cool. With Sarah, her auras are great, but like basically every button she presses, with the exception of like, I mean, both of her skills feel really kind of boring to use at the moment. And this is why I'm not a really big fan of using Sarah right now, even though I recognize that she's a good unit. And this fight, I guess, is kind of the boss version of that, where like, once you get the hang of their mechanics and you bring the appropriate countermeasures, I think you can deal with them. You can get around them. It just, similar to the mid-Italian slugs, they're not fun to fight against because the mechanic they have is obnoxious. Once again, another brave attack there to avoid pushing him into the cleanse threshold while his recast was up. Yeah, I've been kind of talking philosophically here. I haven't really talked much about the fight per se, because most of it's just been punching them and trying to time things so that their recast doesn't annihilate us. I did mention the whole cut loose thing. We're kind of getting to the point where I'm ready to basically do that, because we're approaching the final threshold. That last 29%. And the countermeasure we're bringing for that is going to be, as I think most people have used, the friend Golbez BT, because since they patched the fight so that you have to deal with the Kieran Bear style bullshit, being able to get one or two of those thresholds completely neutered by the BT effect is fantastic. Golbez BT is an interesting one to me because, much like Sephiroth BT, it's a unique effect as opposed to just being a big stat increase, meaning it can't really be power crept because it just does something that kind of changes, it kind of defies the rules of the game a bit. And that has its uses, but I feel like the main time it is going to have its uses are for situations where the devs are like, no, the way you'd normally deal with this isn't allowed to work because we want to mess with you. Which kind of feels lame to me. So we're going to just start chucking snakes at these guys in the summon phase. I was a little bit annoyed that Ramu betrayed me with the break order there. I don't know if you saw that. Alternating hits ended up making them just swap turns instead of getting delayed, but we'll deal. Obviously the Paralyze is not going to come into effect as we're just chucking meteors at them. But yeah, thanks. Whatever I think of the BT effect as from a boss fight design standpoint, I can't deny that it's a pretty awesome BT effect, and I'm a little sad that I'm not going to be picking it up. I like Golbez a lot, but he's not a favorite, and so I'm not quite at the point where I want to, like, you know, 3 misses get dunked on. Not quite at the point where I want to token it, you know. Besides, Bartz is one of my favorite characters, and so those tokens are reserved, or spoken for right now. Speaking of favorites, you'll see here, I never actually used the Pharaoh's Calls the entire fight, because I was hoping to find a good window where Pecil was going right at, like, I basically never found a point at which I was like, now is the time when I want to use one of these 2 precious kind of debuff things. I probably should have early in the fight. So they kind of ended up going to waste a little bit. But they still ended up letting us, at the very least, just kind of pile on the damage for these last couple turns. So yeah, I probably could have done this even better than it turned out, which is cool. But there we go. We got 3 Moonkin here, and that's a Kadaj Lufenia complete. I'll try to go back in and use a different team, maybe, but in any case, I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next video. Consider liking, subscribing, and thanks for watching. Adios.